maybe content related to the main sessions and breakouts, and maybe related to different audience segments. Or it may be the post-event video on-demand content. It's helpful for you to give some thought regarding how you would like the event to look after the live portion of the event is over. The immediate purpose for video on-demand content is as a catch-up service so that your attendees don't miss the content that has just occurred. This may be through including a basic DVR functionality on the live player, or having video on-demand archives available to access immediately after the session. For catch-up purposes, you will often find that people will access this archive content close to the event. However, this demand will often gradually tail off. While you can archive your content by event session 1, 2, 3, 4, if your event has a strong speaker lineup and subject flow, it may be wise to include video archives that can be organized by speaker, by topic, or by any other genre of metadata that you've selected. Our experience shows that even old archival content can be resurrected with new demand if placed in the right setting. If building a strong post-archive experience is something you want to achieve, it's important that when you're planning for the event, you ask the basic permissions that are needed for this to happen. On the Sardius platform, we will help you create what we call the quote-unquote post-event, which is what the event will look like to the event audience or any other audience who subsequently signs up to the event after it is finished. With this being the case, it's important to finish the event strongly and provide thought as to how you can maximize the benefit of the experience. Unlike an exclusively on-site in-person event, a virtual event gives you the opportunity to create a more curated, ongoing experience for a much longer time after the actual live event has finished. Determining the right analytics. Now, this little part of our guide could have been placed near the beginning, as it goes hand in hand with determining your metrics of success. However, it is also typically the last part of the event. It's important with any event that you look back retrospectively and determine your successes and your failures, the areas that can be improved and the areas that need to be dispensed with in the future. With online events, it is in some ways easier to determine the level of engagement in each component of the event, as you have the ability to quantify to some degree how your audience engaged with each video and part of the event. There are a number of ways that Sardius sets up analytics. However, as with many aspects of the world-changing event, how you set up analytics is determined in many ways by what you need to see to establish whether the event has been successful. The analytics we receive are based on, firstly, player statistics. The built-in statistic engine on the Sardius platform is focused on stats around the video players in your event. This means that there are many and varied analytics around the demographics of who watched your video content, where they watched it from, on what device they watched it on, how long they watched it for, which content they skipped, and which they engaged in. In addition to those video player analytics, you can also get page analytics. We also have this ability to apply your Google Analytics account to different components of the event. This also includes your sponsor's ability to include their Google Analytics account on their sponsor experience, which gives you the ability to track page views versus player views. This can give you the ability to track how many individuals click through on certain calls to action. And some of these calls to action may be key to your key metrics in the event. Ultimately, there's no silver bullet to ensure without a shadow of a doubt that your event will be successful. There's inherent risk involved in pretty much everything in life. However, if you follow the steps outlined in this guide, you have a much greater chance of not only knowing what you want to achieve, but actually achieving it. Obviously, as the size and the complexity of your event grows, the checklists of tasks to complete the event successfully will grow. If you're already a Sardius client, our event management team is waiting to get into those many lists of tasks that have to be completed so that you will have a world-changing event. If you're not a client, our business development team is really open to having a conversation about whether Sardius is the right platform for you at this moment to take your event to the next level. No matter if you use Sardius or not, we're rooting for the success of your events and your organization. And I thank you so much for taking the time to go through this event guide. There's a reason why the framers of the US Constitution included the right of the people to peaceably assemble in the First Amendment. The reason is that history changes when people gather and exchange ideas. Be it the early church who gathered 2,000 years ago to the recent gatherings of the Arab Spring. Countries change, companies change, and individuals change when people gather, often providing the high watermarks of our lives. Just think about it. My bet is that your life has been changed by an event where people gathered, you exchanged ideas, and your life changed as a result. Well, hi, I'm John O'Hall. I'm with Sardius Media, and I want to take you on a journey over these next few videos to help you ask the right questions about your proposed event and ultimately get you the right answers. As you consider your upcoming event, you may not be thinking of an outcome as earth-shattering as those historical events I just mentioned. After all, you may only be planning your quarterly leadership gathering of your organization, the annual get-together. However, if you really want to achieve the change you so dearly would love to see in your organization or movement, perhaps the event you are planning can create the momentum that you so desperately need. You just need to be intentional about it, and that is what these videos and this guide is all about. Now, of course, I'm representing Sardius Media, and in these videos, it's a given that we're going to be leaning pretty heavily in the direction of what makes a great online event. However, I'm hopeful that the journey we go on will be helpful no matter what type of event you're putting on. The questions we ask throughout these videos will hopefully lead you to clarity regarding what you want to achieve and how you can achieve it. We'll move from one video to the next, from big picture questions to the more technical online aspects of your event. We're rooting for your event success and hope that the following video and guide will help you navigate these waters. I'm looking forward to our time together. Let's get into it. Often when you're starting to think about your event, you have something in your mind. Maybe it's a full room, a conference center, or a stadium buzzing with life and activity. And immediately, what typically happens is you go into planning mode to see how you can achieve that goal. But I want to encourage you to go back just a little bit further before we begin the planning phase and ask some more existential questions. So number one, I want to figure out your why. Whether you're having an in-person event or an online event, one of the first things you need to determine is what exactly the metrics of your success are in the event. These metrics are not primarily related to the number of people attending the event, although getting a big crowd may certainly be connected to your metrics. If you're hosting a product or a service launch, your ultimate goal will be related to the sales that are derived from this event. The amount of people who attend the event may therefore be a key indicator of success, but getting the wrong crowd that results in very few sales may lead you to adjust your strategy later on. In this regard, just getting the big crowd might make you feel good in the moment, but it would be more helpful for your team to talk about the real metric of sales and plan towards that particular goal. Now, if your goal is to communicate your vision to your superfans, your radical core audience, having a huge crowd with hundreds of thousands of people may surprisingly actually work against your main metric if your audience wants to be addressed as if they are the only one that matters. Including them just as one of the many thousands of the audience may be a bad idea. So I want you to think deeply about the metric of success, whether it's online or in person, and work with your team to achieve that particular goal. Now, let's translate some of these thoughts to putting on an online event. Now, in the TV industry, getting the eyeballs is a key indicator of success. Large numbers are also attractive to online broadcasters as they can result in advertising revenue. The strategy for engaging your audience online may be the same, simply gathering a big crowd. And if a simple big crowd is the objective, then maybe the right strategy is simply to go out on all the platforms like YouTube and Facebook. But if you're really honest with yourself and think about it, your goal is probably more than simply the eyeballs. And so when you think about it, there are some limitations to that strategy. Maybe you don't want to simply give away all your audience's data to those particular social media platforms. Maybe you want to serve them yourself. And that's why we're seeing the emergence of many OTT media platforms. Previously, you would watch content through the major media outlets, ABC, NBC, BBC, now Facebook and YouTube. And now the content makers are going, quote unquote, over the top to reach their markets directly. Think about Disney Plus, Discovery Plus, and the multitude of other niche brand video channels who are engaging their core audience directly. Getting to know who your core audience is, your super fans, your radical core, and engaging them around topics that are relevant to their life may be a more efficient and effective way to energize your people, who will then leave the event and immediately sell the vision to 10 more of their friends and therefore grow your superfan radical core. Now, choosing the right type of event is important. There are different types of people, there are different types of objectives, there are different types of events. It's important to understand the difference between meetings. In some meetings, you need to achieve deep collaboration between attendees, while other gatherings are about gathering as many people as you can to mobilize them behind a specific vision. Sometimes you need an intimate fundraising banquet, and other times it's a rock concert that you're after. There's no right type of event which is better than another, but it is important to recognize what you're trying to achieve and choose the right medium to communicate exactly what you need to. Now, there generally is a right type of event for what your present needs are, and you shouldn't spend a whole bunch of time and money and then later on realize that you've made a poor choice to achieve the desired goals. And so that is why I want to encourage you to be intentional in figuring out the right medium. The rationale and motivation for an online event is just as important as the rationale and motivation for an in-person physical event. There's not one type of online event that you have to go down. It's often possible to mimic the aspects of a physical in-person event when you're having an online equivalency. However, it's important to recognize the differences between online and in-person events. Simply being online means you are communicating in another medium, and while this offers many benefits over in-person events, there are similarly many elements that cannot and shouldn't be reproduced. Online communication is better for intense, effective, focused, interactive information sharing, as well as focused networking, one-on-one meetings. While physical events can be much better for creating space and time, more serendipitous networking, having meals, coffees, and walks. Similarly, you will never experience the intense, ear-bleeding, emotionally high experience of being in a mosh pit at a concert online. However, you can experience a perhaps more intimate, artistic experience through a broadcast feed. It's also important that you think in a correct manner about your financial budget. It is so possible for you to lose a significant amount of money in organizing a large-scale event. However, it is important also for you to consider the financial aspects in the right way. As with many endeavors in life, it's also important not to underestimate the potential financial benefits and use false economy in planning your event. Many of the components of a successful event will involve spending, and this includes your stage lineup, your production budget, or broadcast distribution budget. Often your event will only be as strong as the weakest link. For example, you may decide to go big on funding a high-end speaker or band, and then skimp on the production budget. In most scenarios, this would be a bad decision. And the same is true for online delivery of your event. There are some amazing solutions being offered on the market at the moment, and it's important that you don't skimp on providing an amazing experience for your audience. Now, we have advised many event coordinators who are hosting large events, and often the first component that is considered is the lineup of presenters on stage. Maybe it's famous bands and speakers who will have the ability to gather a crowd. Gifted and charismatic stage personalities are great, and they may form a component of your overall strategy. However, it's imperative that before you invite any presenters, you are clear about your metrics and your narrative. Now, the narrative is the story behind your event, the reason why your audience will want to attend your event rather than the other events where the same speakers and the bands will be attending. Discovering your narrative is typically a process which begins with discovering your why in hosting the event and the why your attendees have for attending. Now, following tried and trusted methods of storytelling and communicating your narrative is helpful for both in-person and for online events. Thinking of your potential attendees as the hero of the story that you are inviting them into, and with you as the trusted guide, is ultimately helpful to all parties and the vision which you would like to invite the attendees into. It may be that you're giving your audience a unique experience and opportunity to get involved in the most life-changing movement. And if that is true, you need to recognize and find ways to communicate that vision that involves your audience. This narrative must be communicated through your event brand guide and your written and video communication as you promote your event. Now, while this is true of all events, it is helpful not to miss this element when it comes to planning your online event, and consider the unique online methods to respond to this narrative. Determining your stage lineup. Who can communicate your goals most effectively in spoken, written, or musical form? Often the impetus, even the existence of an event, comes from the lineup of speakers, subject matter experts, influencers, and musical artists. While this may be the main hook to gather a big audience, the simple ability to gather an attractional stage lineup should not determine your event. The why and the narrative should always come first. Individuals or groups who present or perform from your stage need to serve that particular vision and narrative. And if this doesn't happen, there is a possibility that you, your audience, and your guest speaker will come away from this event feeling used, and this lack of cohesion almost never achieves the worthwhile purposes for which you started out. Now, when considering either a hybrid or a completely online event, it's important to consider the different mediums of communication you're employing. A stage in front of 50,000 people in an arena versus small screens in front of 1 million people are two entirely different mediums. Although the latter is reaching a much bigger audience, a small screen is always a much more intimate medium and requires an approach where the audience is being addressed in a more direct, one-on-one manner, much like I'm doing now. When considering your lineup, also consider how you're going to communicate to both audiences most effectively, and consider how your lineup is going to do this. Audience engagement is important in both mediums of communication. Now, it's clear to all of us that the world was taken by surprise by the COVID-19 pandemic. And the one question that we've received more than any others throughout this time is predicated on the longing to return to in-person events, but then people say how things will change in a post-COVID world with regard to online events. And our response has long been that we also long for the return to in-person events that we're seeing now. However, online events are not going away. Even before COVID, the online component of events was increasingly in demand, and the complexity was also increasing. So this is an area you shouldn't ignore for too much longer. So that's pretty much all there is for this section. So let's go through our checklist. So, you figured out the reasons why you're doing your event. The next thing you need to figure out is how to communicate what you're doing to your intended audience to ensure the right people are at your event. Although this is a little bit of a simplistic take, the human dynamics of any event remain pretty consistent, whether you're a nervous high schooler wanting to pull off the student event of the century, or gathering 80,000 into a football stadium, or hosting an online event of any size. It really is true if you get that school quarterback and cheerleader and their buddies, people start paying attention no matter what demographic you're trying to reach. The quarterback may be different for different audiences, and you may have to be ready to communicate these nuances in language that your particular audience understands and connects with. But outside of these communication differences, other dynamics are actually often the same. The bottom line is that getting people to an event typically revolves around a number of rather similar factors. So let's consider the reasons why people register, buy tickets, and eventually attend an event. And these things are things that you need to consider in your networking and marketing as you prepare for your event. Number one, people will come to see a VIP, a favorite musical act, an influencer, a subject matter expert. That stage lineup is important. Number two, people come to learn. They're going to be equipped at your event. Number three, often people will register to create memories and experience a unique moment of high emotion. That might be a rock band. Number four, for the networking opportunities, often at expo events. Number five, to support a cause. Number six, to be at the event of your tribe, your affinity group, the annual get-together. Number seven, because friends and colleagues are going to the event and people want to be there and belong to the group. Number eight, People go to be inspired and get a kickstart, a kick up the backside in a particular area. And number 9, people go to be entertained. Often the reasons why people eventually attend are a combination of a number of these factors, and even more mundane reasons can just nudge a person over that finish line into actually buying a ticket. Now, we've talked about marketing, and it may start with emotion, narrative, and vision, and these are all great things, but the mechanics of getting the right amount of people to your event are just that, mechanics. And after a number of events, you will typically be able to estimate the percentage of people who will show up when comparing that to the number of people who have registered. So if you have a free event, it might be, we typically get 50 to 60 people, 60% of people who register who actually attend. Or if you have a paid event, it might be 85 to 95% of people. Also, the same dynamics of giving attendees a nudge to register with tools like giving a price break for early bird purchases, maybe a coupon code or an opportunity to be part of an exclusive component of the event, like a VIP group. They're seemingly mundane, but they can be surprisingly effective. Therefore, it's important to employ a number of marketing strategies when inviting your potential audience. Communicating both the high-level narrative that we've talked about, as well as these more mundane tool nudges on timing, cost, and exclusivity, which can get people over the edge, and so you know the number of people who are going to attend your event. The next question is, who do you want attending your event? As we've previously mentioned, it's important to narrow in on the goals of the event that dictate who should attend. The value of success isn't always determined by the number of people registering. The question is, do you want the people who are attending to maybe complete a particular action after the event? Do you want to inspire a certain demographic to do something as a result of the event? Answering this who question will dictate your marketing strategy and the critical criteria of success moving forward. Next, why attendees buy your tickets. Knowing that it is typical for a person to buy a ticket due to several factors, which we've mentioned, it's important that you are aware of the channels it will take to communicate those reasons to a particular audience so that they can hear your message and then register. These vary per organization, and therefore it's important for you to think about your own unique situation. But these typically include things like word of mouth. Personal recommendations in any industry, in any vertical, is typically the best way for people to join up. But we can combine with that other things, exclusive invitations, incentivizing a certain group to sign up. Maybe it's an influencer recommendation. It's not just a friend, but it's somebody who the particular demographic really recognizes and admires, who recommends people sign up is always helpful, and typically one of your best forms of marketing. Because one of the main reasons that many attend an event is because other people they know are attending, it's critical to get the mavens in a particular social group to sign up, those people who are early adopters. Number 2 channel, social media marketing. This has become such a pervasive way of communicating to today's generation. Providing value through social media channels is always a good precursor to then inviting the audience through normal posts or through paid advertising. And then number 3, your traditional advertising channels of TV, radio, print, pay-per-click, banner advertising can still be effective to reinforce your message. And getting all 3 of these channels to come together is often the way to get people across that finish line. It's also important to distinguish between the reasons people will buy a ticket or register for your event and the reason they will remember it. Your brand values and the reason they feel connected to your tribe, which will result in word-of-mouth recommendations and repeat visits. The brand value is built through the value that you deliver at the event, which could be as little as providing value through a networking platform. But real loyalty comes when you can actually create unique and memorable experiences. And this leads us into the building of the event. So that's pretty much all there is for this section, but let's go through our checklist. So we've thought about the why of your event. We've thought about who your main audience is and how you will communicate to them about attending. Now we need to get into the meat of planning your event. And the first part now is determining when the event should take place and how long it should last. Now, event producers who are familiar with the cadence of an in-person physical event are often curious and ask us whether there are similar optimal times and durations for online events. There's no exact science in answering this question. However, there are some guiding principles which must be considered. In-person events will often require an attendee to take time out from their usual schedule. It might include travel and booking accommodation, and if this is the case for a significant portion of your audience, then it's often wise to make the hassle involved in travel and staying away from home worth it. You, as the event producer, must be concerned with the creation of space in the event, time for networking and meeting, as well as determining the potential for curated moments in plenary sessions which unite the messaging and can mobilize your entire audience. Now, hybrid events, online and in person, typically have the same considerations as in-person events, as it mirrors the in-person event experience. Now, it often comes as a surprise to first-time hybrid event producers that the people attending the online portion of the event are actually physically present at the event. They may have other commitments, or they may be in a hotel room, and they don't want to miss out on certain parts of the event. It may be that they missed a plenary session because of an offline meeting, and they are catching up with the flow of the event. The bottom line with hybrid events is that you should simply mirror the in-person schedule. Exclusively online events may be treated slightly differently. Since they don't require attendees to take time off work, one more significant consideration is that attendees may only be joining outside of work hours, unless, of course, you're hosting a work event, in which case holding it within typical working hours becomes optimal. Many in-person expo-type events have very little main stage time and spread the event over a number of days so that attendees can network, have offline business meetings, grab a coffee or lunch together. These same components are not all present with online events. The event isn't constrained by a physical place, and therefore the times when aspects of the event happen will differ. It's important that you give thoughts to when your main plenaries in a virtual event happen for this very reason. If you typically have longer, more drawn-out plenaries, you may think about condensing your main program slightly time-wise. I might add that it's important not to swing the pendulum too far in the other direction. It's not unusual for our project managers to advise clients on the need to actually include breaks in their schedule when they have multiple back-to-back one-hour sessions. In addition, while you can't grab lunch with someone online, there are still numerous networking tools that should be factored in your event. Maybe give thought to how your event can be more than a simple one-way broadcast. The question remains, when should you schedule certain components within maybe a multi-day event? Now, there are no hard and fast rules. You know your audience, and we can have constructive conversation about that. But we typically see a few general rules that are different than in person. We often see spikes at the beginning of an online event in a much greater way than we would in an in-person where people may arrive late. And then, as with in-person event, we will see spikes when top bill presenters, music acts, or VIPs are on stage. And so hopefully that's helpful as you start planning and thinking about the timing and the duration of your event. So that's pretty much all there is for this section. So let's go through our checklist. Whether you're having an entirely in-person, a hybrid, or an exclusively virtual event, there are a number of questions that you need to answer. One of the first questions is related to venue and production. Often this seems to be answered more easily for in-person than online events. It's natural that if you're having an event for, say, 15 people, you may choose to have it in a boardroom and ensure there are enough snacks and refreshments in the room for the duration of the meeting. And then if you're having a 15,000 person event, you're going to rent an arena with adequate audio-visual production so that the audience doesn't have any challenges with seeing or hearing what is going on. Now, similar principles are true for online events, and yet sometimes the production elements for online events are not thought through thoroughly. WebRTC, that's Web Real-Time Conversations, and other video conferencing applications that you'll be aware of are amazing tools for real-time interactions. However, their strength is in connecting individuals through low-latency video connections. And that's usually for small numbers of people and not for broadcasting a high-quality message to thousands. Now, if you're having a 15-person boardroom meeting and you wish to take it online, then utilizing such WebRTC, Zoom-type applications is the right choice. If you're broadcasting a message to thousands, however, using a low-latency application is probably not the right choice. Now, the first answer to this question is production value. If an individual is invited to present a TED Talk type presentation, there will often be nerves involved. The individual has to get the presentation just right. There are numerous books on the market of how a person can do this effectively. In addition to the person's presentation and how they look on the day, the presentation is typically given on a thought-out, clutter-free stage with high-quality cameras placed perfectly, lights, audio, visual, which mean that the only thing that is focused upon is the message itself. Everything is just right to present that message. Video conferencing lends itself to convenience, extemporaneous communication, and ultimately disposable content, which is often not the right feel you want to go for when you're going for a high-quality presentation. While a presenter can prepare their content in a similar manner to a TED Talk, presenting it through a webcam in a home with poor lighting, poor audio, and distracting background, with a high risk for video dropout and audio sync issues and typically no tech help, it's not often the most ideal solution. It must be noted that there are definitely ways to improve the production quality of video conferencing conversations, recording on a higher quality camera with better lighting, audio. However, these things can often be logistically challenging, especially if you're dealing with a presenter half a country away that is slightly tech challenged. Number 2, the buffering issue. Now, personal experience and larger analytic studies reveal that audiences hate buffering. frame drops, other glitching in video. Low latency video technologies currently make the risk of such occurrences happening much, much greater. And the risk is only increased with a larger audience. To avoid issues like this, when presenting to larger audiences, we suggest that you utilize a professional encoding solution for such live situations. Now, thinking about what you want to communicate and how that will be communicated needs to be a holistic process, whether you're planning in person or online. What is the content? How is it presented via video? i.e., what is the production quality? And what platform you are using to present it are all relevant questions to answer. Sardius, we have a high-quality interactive platform. However, if the production quality and the content of the video is not very good, then the overall experience will not be a compelling one. So that's pretty much all there is for this section, but let's go through our checklist. In this session, we're going to be talking about a subject that may seem very administrative, and that's registration. In actual fact, the conversation you have around this very issue actually determines a whole lot about your event and your attendees' experience. So let's jump in. Determining whether your event should have a registration wall is one of the first practical considerations in building your event, as this will be the first thing that is built. It may be true that you can attract a bigger audience on social platforms such as Facebook or YouTube in a short period of time for relatively little cost, but the challenge with this approach is that it's Facebook and YouTube that are the ones who reap the benefits of knowing and serving your audience rather than you. The future of all media delivery is undoubtedly increased customization for the viewer. And the real question you need to be asking right now is whether you want social media platforms to be the one getting to know and serve your audience, or whether you want to be the ones doing that. Registration walls, whether they are paid or free, undoubtedly place a barrier of entry in front of any audience, and a barrier that undoubtedly reduces the amount of attendees. But on the flip side, it also significantly increases the attendees' commitment to your event and to your cause. It communicates a level of exclusivity which is often desirable, and it can significantly cover the costs of your event. Social media strategy should certainly be a component of your overall marketing strategy. However, limiting your content delivery to a single platform decreases your ability to know and to serve your audience effectively. One of the key strategies that we advise at Sardius is to host your event to your own URL and thereby increase awareness of your website and your online community. Sardius will typically host your event at a subdomain of your URL. For example, we often put like a subdomain watch.yourhomepage.com. This integrates with your online home and cements this location as a place for you to serve and interact with your audience effectively. We often advise you to use your social media channels not only to engage your audience with your message and market the event, but also to add value through broadcasting introductory or maybe free public-facing plenary or breakout sessions, which ultimately then point back to your event URL address. And maybe we say clip out certain highlights throughout the event and throw it onto your social media channels. If you don't have an extensive social media presence, it might be advisable to utilize some channels of friends, maybe sponsors or other friends that do have a significant online social media presence, and in that way you can syndicate valuable content which can ultimately grow your audience. Now, once you've determined that you wish to create a registered event, another key component to this decision is whether the event will include a paywall or not, and also what type of information you need to collect during this registration process. So we'll go through a few of those type of events. Let's look firstly at the free event registration. Now, that might be as simple as collecting the email addresses and names of your attendees, and some clients even provide the main sessions of the broadcast completely for free with no registration at all, but then offer many of the features of interactivity, the breakouts, maybe the post-event video on demand as perks, which come if you do that free registration. Such a free registration may be worth it to you in order for you to build your CRM database. Keep in mind that it's often advisable to actually connect the registration information collected here to your day-to-day source of truth client's database so that you can make the most of the data. And also to understand how your audience has interacted with your event through the analytics, which we will address later. Once we've determined to do a registration, one of the next key questions is, should I charge for my event? Now, a paywall doesn't always mean that you have to sell tickets. An alternate option could be a voluntary suggested donation for the event, especially in the case of nonprofits, which technically for us works in much the same way as a ticket sale. Many event organizers will not actually cover the cost of the event simply through ticket sales, but with revenue from other sources coming from sponsors, donations, and other ancillary revenue channels during the event. Every event is different. For one portion of high demand, high ticket price events, paying the event bill is never a challenge. But for another portion of event producers, breaking even may be a very high priority for you. Now, as you would expect, the normal rule of supply and demand applied to your ticket sales. Now, more information at registration and higher ticket prices will typically lead to fewer people making a commitment and going through with a purchase. Another consideration that is often relevant for nonprofit events is that when you sell tickets, there is a requisite expectation created related to your event of a certain level of quality in the deliverables, which often includes a high-touch customer service necessity. And therefore, such organizations may choose the route of a suggested donation for a ticket instead. Now, there isn't a right or wrong approach in answering these questions. However, you should consider them alongside your main event metrics as you build your registration. The next section we're going to look at is gathering the right information for you. With any type of ticketing, you will need to determine the fields of information you wish to collect. These may include information necessary for registration and the smooth running of your event, information necessary to create a user profile in the event, and any other marketing information that is helpful for you. I'm just going to run through a list of examples of fields that you may consider, and we'll bring it up on the graphic. Name, your first and last name, email address, a full physical address, a partial physical address, country, state, postal code, telephone number, maybe social media links, a short bio, a profile picture of the attendee, a type of ticket required. You may want to suggest different types of audience journeys throughout the event. You may want to have a field for promotional codes, credit card information, and custom marketing questions and opt-ins. As we look at these fields, one of the questions that comes up, should I be concerned about privacy issues in collecting this data? As more and more companies have profited from using the personally identifiable information, PII, of their constituents, privacy concerns have become an increasing concern for any online endeavor. Now, in many countries around the world, legal frameworks have been created to protect citizens from the unscrupulous practices of certain online companies. Now, even if privacy concerns are something that you have never considered before, it's important if you have an online presence and you collect any kind of personally identifiable information, that you give it a little bit of thought. If you have a web or an app presence, now would be a good time to develop your own privacy policy, terms of service, and perhaps a cookie policy to communicate that you are not one of those unscrupulous organizations who are going to sell data to the highest bidder. As you build the registration of your event, it's important to display these policies to your audience to communicate how you are using the audience's information. We typically find that displaying these opt-ins at the point of registration is the right place to communicate these policies. Related to these privacy issues is obviously GDPR, CCPA, and other legal requirements around the world. Now, if you have a significant audience in Europe, UK, or in California, it's important that your online event is compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, EU and UK, and the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, respectively. You are responsible as the data controller of your constituents' information. And in a subsidiary manner, Sodius Media is responsible as a data processor for your constituents. Other jurisdictions around the world have similar provisions to GDPR and CCPA, and Sodius tries to keep up to date with many of these. But we've placed an emphasis on compliance with both GDPR and CCPA, as these, up to this point, have been the gold standard in relationship to privacy compliance. Sodius will provide you with all the relative documentation regarding how we use the information to aid in the smooth running of an online event, and will require you to give permission so that we can process your data. The next question in building your registration is, should I limit the number of devices per registration? Privacy issues are nothing to be afraid of. While you shouldn't be using the personal identifiable information for purposes for which you're not authorized, obtaining the consent of attendees to opt into your calls to action is often exactly what both you and the attendee want. Business models moving forward will increasingly rely upon the organization's ability to customize their services and communications to their clients. I find it both reassuring and convenient to walk into a local coffee shop where they know your name and they've already prepared your coffee. One barrier to collecting this information, however, is when individuals share their username and passwords. And this has been a problem that Netflix and many of the other online video platforms have to deal with. When Barry from accounting tweets out his access codes and suddenly 1,500 people are using it, you have a lot of useless information about Barry. Added to the fact that you may have missed out on selling many tickets and a lot of money. For these reasons, we recommend that you limit the amount of devices per registration. When an individual buys a ticket or registers to a Sodius-powered event, a unique token is created per registration, and that is used to create the individual event journeys throughout the event. It's also possible to restrict the amount of devices that can access the event on that token. As you build the registration, it's important to consider your goals and whether you wish to restrict each token to a specific number of devices, whether it's 1 device, 10 devices, 20 devices. Audience journeys. You may choose to develop an event where every attendee is served the same content the same way. Alternately, you may wish to create an event where the audience either chooses or is placed in a custom journey related to their audience segment. In much the same way as you have choices in an in-person event, you need those same choices online. Now, this may change what content that audience segment sees, which user interface they interact with, and which other attendees they interact with as well. You may build an event where attendees get to choose what components of the event they wish to participate in and when they want to participate in it after they've entered the event, or these choices may be made by the audience during that registration process. I'm going to run through a few examples of choices that the audience can make either before registration or after registration. The first one is audience segment. Do you have a leaders track and a youth segment and a VIP segment that needs to be served different experiences, different content than the general audience? This might be determined by a ticket type in the registration process. Secondly, breakouts. Do you have multiple breakout sessions in your event, some of which should be attended by different affinity groups? Again, it is possible for individuals to opt in to this right journey for them in the registration process and therefore make an indication of which breakout they will attend at that point. Chat watch parties. In larger events, it's not advisable to have the entire audience in one chat window. Obviously, depending on how interactive the audience is. As a rule of thumb, I always say if you have an audience over 1,000, you may consider breaking your audience into watch parties by maybe geographic region or affinity group. Selecting skilled and appropriate moderators in your watch parties can add a significant value to your event. Moderators might be subject matter experts, maybe regional representatives, or maybe in a church it might be a group pastor or a cell group leader. It's also sometimes advisable to include the actual presenter in the watch party if the video being played is actually played simulated live. And so you add that live component to the event, and so people can ask questions on the fly. One-on-one meetings is another component. Part of any event are exclusive experiences. Meeting one-on-one with subject matter experts, consultants, counselors, or for personal prayer is one such exclusive experience. While this might be decided later on in the event, it's also possible to schedule this experience through the registration process and make this part of the individualized journey for the attendee. Building your online registration. For online events, registering for the event with your organization may be the first point of contact that an attendee has with you. Therefore, there are a number of elements to think through in addition to the fields of information that you're collecting. And these ultimately relate to assets that our project managers and event managers typically ask you to provide us with. Firstly, the design of the ticketing. You need to be thinking about including your event branding in the ticket. Secondly, confirmation message once registered. This is the page that appears immediately after registration to indicate success in registration. We have some stock confirmation pages, but advise you to customize this message as it's from you to the attendee. The registration confirmation email content, this is very similar to the confirmation message we just talked about. Now, we have some examples of what good confirmation emails look like, but again, this is a message from you, so it's important to ensure you get the message and the tone correct from your organization. Lastly, the pre-event landing page. Once an individual has registered, they won't experience the full event until the day that it begins. However, it is still possible to move the objectives of the event forward with an effective pre-event landing site. This is the location where registrants will be directed to upon completing registration. It includes your basic branding elements with a written welcome message and usually a countdown to when the event will open. We also advise that in addition to any text, you include a welcome video, which can help orient your audience regarding what to expect at the event, as well as creating excitement and maybe pointing people to a specific call to action that you may have in that pre-event build-up period. This might be a temporary landing page until the event watch page is created. Now let's talk about collecting money for a moment. A number of ticketing services out there handle the payment processing of an event for a significant fee, which is often taken off the top of the monies collected before the remainder then reaches you. Now, we at Saudis operate on a different model, and that's a bring your own Stripe account approach. This means that you will pay the percentage transaction fee, maybe that 2 to 3%, and then receive the income directly from your audience to your bank account. The next question is, when should I open registration? Now, some organizations have established behaviors concerning when they open registration for their events, and it would create confusion to their audience if they veered from this course. However, when no such general behavior has been established, a common question that is often asked is when registration should be opened. Now, while many aspects of a physical event and an online event are transferable, this is one area that must have a few different considerations. An in-person event will often require the audience to take time off work, or at least their day-to-day schedule if it's an internal organizational event. This often requires much more forward planning, including travel, accommodation arrangements. For this reason, it's often important to open event ticketing up to a year or more in advance for an in-person event. Added to this is the fact that an in-person event often has limited capacity at every level of the event, which could add the motivation to buy early. Now, an online event does not invade as much of the day-to-day schedule of an audience, a fact that must be considered when creating the event schedule if it's entirely online. And therefore, opening up the registration closer to the event and building a clear communication plan from the start of the registration to the end of the event and beyond is something that should be considered. For hybrid events, you may even consider opening up the online portion of the registration later than the in-person portion. While you can still utilize early bird pricing in online events have no